darkness swallowed the room, like a cold, suffocating curtain enveloping everything. Sophie could feel a chill breeze on the back of her neck. This sensation, as if something or someone was standing right behind her, made her shiver. Her heart pounded so forcefully that it felt like it was about to break through her chest. Her throat tightened, as if an invisible hand was choking her. A faint whisper echoed, so gentle, yet enough to make every hair on her body stand on end. "Mom?" The voice echoed again, right next to Sophie's ear. An overwhelming fear surged through her. Sophie trembled, trying to turn her head, her eyes desperately searching for safety in the suffocating darkness. And then, a pale, wrinkled face, just inches from hers, appeared in the dark. Its empty, hollow eyes stared deeply. Its mouth was wide open, with dark, jagged teeth, and it suddenly bit down onto her neck. Sophie screamed in horror, her scream ripping through the night. She collapsed to the floor, slamming her head into the edge of the bed, the pain shooting through her skull. Everything around her spun. Dizzying Elliot rushed over, pulling Sophie up, but just then, a hand reached out from the darkness. Gripping tightly onto his ankle, Elliot screamed, struggling to free his foot, but the hand was icy cold, gripping like claws, refusing to let go. He could feel the chill radiating from it, a sense that something invisible was pulling him into the darkness. Then, from the corner of the room, a small shadow began to crawl out. It was the third child, but this time, it wasn't whole. Its neck was twisted at a strange angle. Each bone in its body creaked with sharp, keening sounds, as if its body was being bent from the inside, each bone shattering. Sophie could barely contain her revulsion. She screamed, panicked, crawling back toward the door. She wanted to run, to escape this room, but just as she touched the doorknob, she froze. Right beneath the doorframe were a series of child-sized footprints all over the floor. The prints were made of water. Water was dripping down from the ceiling, the cold drops seeping into her hand as she touched it. Sophie slowly looked up, and then she screamed in despair, her voice breaking. On the ceiling, the children were crawling down, one by one. Their eyes were still white and empty, and their mouths were still wide open, never closing. Their forms contorted as if they had been living in darkness, becoming one with it. But those sounds could not compare to the laughter that filled the darkness. A hollow, soulless laugh spreading throughout the room. Sophie could bear it no longer. She backed away, clinging tightly to Elliot, both of them embracing each other in panic, unable to find a way out. From the shadows, cold hands began to reach out, gripping them tightly, pulling them into an endless nightmare. At that moment, the laughter grew louder, as if thousands of children were pulling their souls down into the depths. Sophie could no longer breathe. She froze, her eyes wide, staring up at the ceiling. The children were still crawling downward. Their eyes were white, devoid of pupils, their mouths wide open, as if they had been screaming for countless lifetimes without making a sound. Their skin was wrinkled and grayish, clinging tightly to their bones like wet paper pressed against a decayed corpse. They didn't walk, they crawled, slowly, eerily. Their tiny hands dug into the ceiling, their nails decayed, but still scraping in a chilling screech as they dragged across the paint. Their bodies contorted as if resisting their structure. Each joint snapped as if broken, and then immediately twisted back into place in the most grotesque way. Sophie couldn't scream. Her throat had tightened, as though an invisible hand was choking her voice. A suffocating panic spread through her. The terror paralyzed her. Then, one of them snapped its head back 180 degrees. Its neck twisted grotesquely, but its head slowly turned towards Sophie, its hollow eyes staring directly at her. It had no mouth, only a swollen patch of white skin, stretched tight, sealed where the mouth should have been. But from deep within that skin, A faint, echoing voice emerged, as if coming from the depths of the earth. "Mom, bring me back." Sophie broke into tears, her sobs caught in her chest, her whole body shaking with helplessness. Elliot held her tightly, his eyes glued to the ceiling, his breath ragged. He wanted to pull her away, but before he could move, a body fell straight from the ceiling, crashing violently onto the floor. The sound of impact, like bone shattering, echoed throughout the room. Sophie screamed, and Elliot recoiled instinctively, both of them tumbling to the ground. It wasn't a child, it was a woman. Her hair was matted, her skin a sickly purple, as if her body had been submerged in water for far too long. Her clothes were torn and stained with mud and dried blood. Her neck was bound tightly with a rotten rope, with a few strands still dangling from the ceiling. Her eyes were white and vacant, staring directly at Sophie. A hanged corpse. Elliot crawled backward, his back hitting the edge of the table. Sophie wanted to scream, but only a hoarse breath escaped. She wanted to run, but before she could rise, the corpse opened its mouth. Not to speak, but to vomit. Chunks of black, rotting flesh, mixed with thick, grayish mucus like decayed oil, poured from her throat, splattering onto the floor, making sickening slurping and gurgling sound. The substance crawled, wriggling like a living creature, blending into the wet footprints that had stained the tiles. It was as if it was part of something larger, a being nourished by hatred, vengeance, and curses. "Elliot, run!" Sophie finally screamed, pulling at her husband's hand. They rushed toward the door. Elliot yanked the door open, and right before them, a child stood there. So close that Sophie could see every crack in its face, the fissures running deep like a spider's web. It didn't speak. It only stared at her. Then, slowly, it raised its hand, reaching for Sophie's hand. Cold as ice, as if death had placed its hand on her skin. And then the voice echoed again, clearer than ever, as though coming from the very depths of Sophie's mind. Mom, please, don't leave me." Sophie felt her skin numb, as if it were being frozen from the inside out. The small hand was still gripping her wrist tightly, the cold seeping through every fiber of her flesh, burrowing deep into her bones. She jerked her hand away, but it wouldn't come loose. The grip tightened even more. "Mom, don't leave me," the voice whispered right in her ear, not echoing from the air. No, it came from within her head, like a murmur from a forgotten memory. Sophie looked down in panic. The child had no face. Not a face hidden in the shadows, not a distorted face, but no face at all. A blank pale space, taut and smooth like the surface of wax, smoothed out by an unseen hand. No eyes, no nose, no mouth, just a void, yet it felt as though it were staring straight into her soul. Sophie screamed, kicking the child away and pulling Elliot to run, but her feet wouldn't lift. It was as if an invisible weight was pressing her down onto the floor, pinning her ankles with unseen fingers. Elliot, terrified, turned back to pull her, but at that moment, two black hands shot up from the floor itself, grasping at his ankles. Elliot was jerked violently, crashing to the ground, his head slamming into the doorframe, making a dry, hollow sound like a heavy object striking rotting wood. Blood poured from his temple, dripping in streams, mixing with the dark footprints on the floor. "Elliot!" Sophie screamed, rushing to his side. But she froze when she saw more hands. Black, sticky hands, rising from the cracks in the floor, as if the floor itself were a forest of dead arms, now coming back to life. They grabbed Elliot, pulling him down, not violently, but slowly, as if they were gradually devouring him, drawing him into an invisible pit. Elliot struggled, his eyes bloodshot, blood from his forehead spilling into his mouth, mingling with his screams. "Pull me up, please, Sophie, pull me up." And Sophie sobbed, holding tightly to his hand, using every ounce of her strength to pull him up. But those hands were stronger than death itself. They tightened, slippery and sticky, like living vines slithering around Elliot. No! No! Oh!" She screamed until her throat was raw. Elliot was dragged down to the floor. It was as though the floor beneath him wasn't wood anymore, but the mouth of hell itself. An endless pit where every scream was swallowed, every light extinguished. All that remained was Sophie's hand, reaching into the air, cold, trembling, and powerless. The room was deathly silent. No more screams, no more whispers. Only Sophie, kneeling, panting, staring at the bloodstains on the floor where her husband had vanished. And then, the knocking began. From beneath the floor. Slow, steady, like a door being knocked from the depths of the earth. Sophie backed away, her whole body shaking, her mouth moving without sound. But something within her forced her to look up at the ceiling once more. And when she did, the children were back, crawling around the ceiling. And this time, they were laughing. Sophie screamed in despair, as if her scream could reopen the door that had slammed shut on her soul. "Lilia Lodge!" She gripped his hand tightly, using all her remaining strength to pull, her veins standing out, her whole body tense. But the harder she tried, the more the hands from the floor tightened, like claws from hell, determined to never let go. The sound of bones grinding was terrifying, as if Elliot's body was being torn, pulled violently between two worlds, one of life, the other of endless darkness. Sophie shuddered in realization. Elliot's hand was slowly slipping from hers. "Elliot!" His face was ashen, sweat and blood mixed, his mouth wide open as though trying to scream, but no sound came out. That scream had been swallowed by the abyss opening beneath the floor. And then, another face emerged from the floor. Not Elliot. It was a decaying face, pale greenish, rotten, with hollow eye sockets like bottomless pits, its mouth stretched wide to the ears, showing black, jagged teeth like blades. It whispered, in a voice like cold wind through a grave, "Stay here, with us." A pair of rotting, purple hands shot up from the mouth of the floor, wrapping tightly around Elliot's neck. Elliot turned his head to look at his wife one last time. "Sophie?" His scream was like a knife to her heart, raw, choking, filled with panic and pleading. Sophie screamed madly, yanking on her husband's hand, her nails digging into his flesh. But at that moment, Elliot's hand slipped from hers. He was pulled downward, disappearing completely into the floor, as though he had never existed. Sophie collapsed to the ground, flailing in desperation, crushing the air with her hands and screaming her husband's name. But there was nothing left, only the cold, silent tiles beneath her. No Elliot, no calling, no life, just a puddle of dark water, slowly spread across the floor, leaking out from where he had vanished. Sophie trembled, her whole body numb, tears streaming down her face, mixing with the cold floor. No, it can't be," she whispered, as if trying to comfort a shattered soul inside her. And then, a hand emerged from beneath the floor. It clutched her ankle tightly. Sophie jolted, but before she could pull away, and another hand. And another. They rose layer by layer like corpses emerging from the mud after a rainstorm, wrapping around her, tightening, pulling her down to the floor. She screamed, her hands pounding the walls and scratching the floor, but it was futile. Something cold was slithering around her neck like the embrace of a child, or a dead body that refused to leave. And then she saw Elliot. He stood at the end of the hallway, motionless in the darkness, but his eyes were empty, his mouth wide open, his face shattered and mangled, and from his mouth came a whispering, tortured sound. "Sophie, don't leave me." The house began to groan. The walls cracked open, the ceiling bled, and the floor sank like a gateway opening to hell. Sophie screamed, but that scream no one could hear, only the darkness and those waiting beneath. Sophie thrashed, kicked violently, and screamed, but the cold hand still gripped her ankle, pulling her inch by inch toward the black abyss that had just opened up beneath the floor tiles. "No!" She clawed at the ground, her nails breaking, the sound of her sobs blending with the crunching tiles under the horrifying pull. The floor was no longer solid. It was softening, melting, like an open mouth ready to swallow her soul into a place with no return. Sophie struggled in vain, but her body sank deeper and deeper, the darkness overtaking her head, then her shoulders, until the world seemed to crumble into pieces. The smell of dampness, rot, and decay, like a long-dead corpse, rushed into her lungs. And then, everything fell into silence. Sophie opened her eyes. She was standing in a narrow alley, the cold wind biting at her face. Before her was the old house she and Elliot had just moved into not long ago. But it was empty. There was no furniture, no traces. No Elliot, no herself. "Elliot!" Sophie panicked, running inside, racing through the rooms, her heart pounding erratically. "Elliot, where are you? Bring my husband back," she screamed, pounding on doors, shouting his name, but only the hollow echoes answered. The silence was unbearable. She began to cry. She had lost him. Lost everything. Sophie turned around, planning to run to the street for help. But at that moment, a young couple appeared at the gate. The wife tightly held her husband's hand, her eyes shining with excitement and worry, and she asked an elderly neighbor sweeping the yard, "Excuse me, is this house still for rent?" The old woman paused, her gaze darkening, and then she shook her head hesitantly. "You two are young newlyweds. Are you sure this house isn't normal?" Sophie stood frozen. The wind blew through her hair, cold and sharp, like a truth she had just realized. Everything was repeating. History was repeating itself. Old traps, new victims. She looked down. A tiny hand was gripping hers. She stood still, no longer herself. She was no longer Sophie. She had become a part of the house, a part of the loop, a trapped soul. And here, no one would ever leave. "Mom." A child's voice whispered in her ear, sweet yet echoing from a distant realm, like a sound drifting through a world where no living souls exist. Sophie turned around, a little girl with white hollow eyes, holding her hand, smiling. "Mom, we have new guests now."